Okay, let's unpack this. If you operate an online service, knowing the rules for collecting data from kids used to be, well, pretty simple.
It was the clearest line in the digital sand.
Exactly. You had federal COPA-T, and you had that bright line age of 13. That was the finish line. If you stayed above that, you were generally in the clear.
Generally. But not anymore.
Not anymore. That simple regulatory map has just been completely blown up. It's been replaced by a maze.
It's been thoroughly fragmented. I mean, what we're seeing across the United States is this state-level regulatory rush that is just dramatically altering the compliance landscape.
Right.
Especially for any company that interacts with teenagers. I mean, from age 13 all the way up to 17, or even, the day before their 18th birthday.
So that simplicity of the federal baseline is just gone.
Right.
It's now buried under this radically fragmented patchwork of state children's privacy laws.
That's the perfect word for it, a patchwork.
And that's really our mission today. We're going to go beyond that federal baseline to try and understand this new reality. We need to map out these state-level differences, focusing on the ages that matter, the applicability thresholds that decide if you're even covered.
And that's the big one.
It is. And crucially, we need to talk about the philosophical split between the general consumer laws and these newer, highly specific design codes that fundamentally change how services have to be built from the ground up.
I think the central challenge for you, the listener, is just the sheer volume of conflicting requirements. It's overwhelming. We don't just have different ages to track anymore.
Oh.
We have laws that vary dramatically based on the regulatory philosophy behind them. So your compliance hinges on whether a company's success is measured by, say, the sheer volume of data they process, or if the law cares more about the likelihood that children will use their service.
The intent.
The intent, exactly. And trying to track all of those variables, volume, revenue, intent, age across, 24 active or pending jurisdictions? And that's what makes this market so turbulent right now.
It's a full-time job. So to connect those dots and hopefully provide a pathway through all this confusion, we've synthesized a whole host of notes detailing applicability threshold, specific state law names.
Everything from California's well-known acts to the newer ones popping up in Tennessee, Nebraska.
Right, and the current very turbulent legal status of so many of these high-profile acts. I mean, most of them are facing legal challenges as we speak.
And, that profound complexity that we're about to get into, it really highlights exactly why reliable resources are just absolutely essential right now. So before we really jump into the weeds, we do want to pause and thank our sponsor. It's the newly released CISO Marketplace Ecosystem Micro Tool, which helps you track this overwhelming complexity.
You can find it at www.childrenprivacylaws.com. And frankly, a tool like this exists because the system is just no longer manageable with a spreadsheet.
Not a chance. Okay, so let's get into those weeds now and really break down that fundamental philosophical divide that's driving all this fragmentation.
So when we talk about applicability, what we're really asking is, does this law even apply to my business?
The first question you have to ask.
And our source material shows that the most crucial split in state legislation is how they answer that question. Who is a covered entity? It really falls into two distinct philosophical buckets.
It does.
First, you've got the traditional general consumer law approach, the GCL. That's entirely based on quantifiable things like data volume and revenue.
The numbers.
The numbers. And then you have the newer specific design code, or SDC, approach, which pivots entirely on service intent or the likelihood of access by a minor. It's a completely different way of thinking.
And that core distinction, it determines who gets caught in the regulatory net. I mean, the volume approaches, you can think of it as a tool designed to regulate large-scale industrial data processing.
Right.
It casts a very wide net, but really only for the biggest players. The massive retailers, the search engines, the national data brokers.
But the intent approach?
Yeah.
That's different.
It's a sniper rifle. It can absolutely ensnare a smaller, niche player who specifically targets teens, even if their overall data volume is far too low to ever trigger coverage under a traditional GCL.
Let's focus on that volume approach first then. The traditional model that, really came out of laws like the CCPA in California.
The original blueprint.
These GCLs, they use these broad quantitative thresholds aimed at high-volume data processors. They capture minors as sort of an included subset of all consumers.
Right. It's not a kid's law first. It's a consumer law that happens to have provisions for kids.
Exactly. And if the company is deemed big enough based on the numbers, then the requirements related to teens like, say, specific opt-outs for data sales or targeted advertising restrictions, they just kick in as an amendment to the main law.
And these laws, they operate purely on the principle of scale. The goal is comprehensiveness. If you're processing data for nearly the entire population of a state or generating massive revenue, you have to comply.
So let's look at California. Their general consumer law applicability requires a business to meet a really high revenue threshold, right? It's something like $26.625 million in annual gross revenue.
Or the other path is processing the personal data of 100,000 or more consumers or households.
And that 100,000 consumer figure, that really serves as the standard yardstick for these comprehensive privacy laws. It signals that the legislature is aiming for the big national-scale company.
Oh, absolutely. We see it repeated all over the country. Minnesota, Oregon, New Jersey, Virginia, they all use that 100,000 consumer number as the high-end volume threshold for applicability.
Yeah.
It's a pretty clear, easily measurable bar.
But relying just on that 100,000 count, that lets a lot of mid-sized data brokers off the hook, right? If they don't hit that exact number, even if they're profiting heavily from the data they do handle.
Exactly, which is why so many states introduce a second path to get covered. It's what you could call the significant revenue reliance trigger.
So it's not just about how much data you have, but how much money you make from it.
Precisely. For instance, you look at Delaware and Maryland's Online Data Privacy Act, or MODPA. They apply to businesses processing the personal data of 35,000 or more consumers.
Okay, lower number.
A much lower number. Or an even lower 10,000 or more consumers if, and this is the key part, they derive 20% or more of their gross revenue from data sales.
That is a crucial distinction. The 100,000 threshold targets sheer volume, but that 10,000 plus 20%, that targets monetization.
Right. The regulatory philosophy there is pretty clear. If you are making a substantial portion of your money by selling or sharing data, even if your volume is just moderate, you are in scope and you must comply.
When we see that revenue reliance idea pushed even further in other states, showing different levels of, I guess, regulatory aggression.
We do. Consider Virginia. Their general applicability rule has a lower volume threshold of 25,000 consumers. But critically, you must derive over 50% of your gross revenue from data sales to be covered under that path.
50%. That is a powerful signal.
It is. It tells us Virginia is primarily targeting pure data monetization platforms. Your business is data. Whereas Delaware's 20% rule, that shows a much broader sweep. It acknowledges that even secondary data profit streams can be enough to trigger coverage.
Okay, so now let's cross that philosophical divide into the intent or likelihood approach. This is the backbone of those age-appropriate design codes, the AADCs.
And this approach is, frankly, radical because it looks less at a company's overall balance sheet, the $26 million in revenue or the 100,000 consumer count, and more at the actual nature of the online service and its user base.
So it's a shift from measuring a company's financial success to measuring the function of its platform.
That's a perfect way to put it. And it's revolutionary for compliance. You can no longer just filter based on how much data you process globally. You have to actively assess who your users might be. It forces a complete operational change.
And the key trigger phrase that makes compliance so incredibly difficult is reasonably likely. If your service is reasonably likely to be accessed by children, you are in scope. I mean, how do you even prove you aren't reasonably likely?
And that vagueness is entirely intentional. It's designed to force platforms to think about their design from the very beginning.
So a good example of this is the Maryland Age-Appropriate Design Code Act, their KIDS code.
Right, which uses a really potent dual trigger system. A company must first meet those traditional volume or revenue thresholds, so $25 million plus in revenue, or our 50,000 plus consumers.
Okay, so the numbers are still there.
They are, but then there's an A&D. The online service must also be reasonably likely to be accessed by children. So if your platform is clearly tailored to teens, you are in scope. Even if your volume just barely cleared that initial threshold, it's a double layer.
That dual trigger idea is echoed in other intent-focused laws, but sometimes, like you said, the volume takes a backseat entirely.
It does. You look at Vermont. Their law applies to covered businesses that generate a majority of their annual revenue from online services and offer features that are reasonably likely to be accessed by minors. And they define that as under 18.
So if your core business is online and your users skew young, you're covered, period.
Period. Then there's the even more direct trigger, directed at minors. New York's law applies to online service operators that collect personal data from minors or services that are, quote, primarily directed to minors. Again, under 18.
So the definition of primarily directed focuses purely on the targeting. The ads you run, the aesthetic you use, the content you feature, not the total revenue you generate.
Exactly. And Arkansas has a similar, really sweeping approach. It applies to any operator of a service directed at children or teens, which they define as under 16, or are, with actual knowledge of collecting personal information from them.
So a small, niche app targeting 15-year-olds in Arkansas is covered based on intent and knowledge alone.
While a massive national company that fails to meet a volume threshold might actually dodge some of these other state laws, the intent track is specifically designed to catch the specialized players, regardless of their size.
So what becomes immediately problematic for, developers and compliance teams is that many states are actively building these dual-track systems.
It's a huge problem. They pass a general consumer law, a GCL, based on volume, and then maybe a year later, they pass a specialized children's amendment or a design code based on intent or knowledge.
Which leads to massive operational confusion. You've got two different sets of rules, two different enforcement bodies, and often two different protected age groups to track within the same state.
Wait, so Maryland effectively gives itself two bites at the regulatory apple.
That's the perfect analogy.
So if I miss the volume threshold for their general consumer law, MODPA, I can still be caught by the kids code just because my platform might appeal to teens.
That's the operational reality.
Oh.
Let's use Maryland as the prime case study for this confusion. The MODPA, their GCL, it hits businesses based on volume 35,000 consumers, and it covers minors aged 13 to 17.
Okay.
But then you have the separate Maryland Kids Code. It uses a slightly different initial threshold, $25 million revenue, and 50,000 consumers. And it only applies if the service is reasonably likely to be accessed by children, and it covers the wider age range of under 18.
So as a developer, you have to check compliance against two separate acts at the same time.
An operational nightmare. You're forced into two distinct risk assessments. One quantitative, do I hit the GCL numbers? And one qualitative, does a reasonable person think a child would use my platform, which triggers the kids code.
Precisely. And we see this knowledge trigger appearing as a separate path, even within the general consumer laws themselves, which just compounds the confusion.
Like in Montana.
Look at Montana. Its main privacy provisions, the GCL part, they cover the age range of 13 to 15, and they hit businesses based on volume, about 25,000 consumers. That's track one. But the state also passed specialized children's privacy amendments. Those apply up to ages 13 to 17, and they're specifically triggered if a controller actually knows or willfully disregards that their users are minors.
So you might not be a large data processor, but if you send a birthday email to a user who said they were 16, you've just confirmed knowledge.
And you are now covered by the specialized amendment. Boom.
So volume compliance is, a static quantitative exercise. But knowledge and intent compliance forces businesses to constantly monitor and profile their user base and potentially risk regulatory action if they decide to look the other way.
That's absolutely right. And Connecticut introduces that same knowledge trigger with its children's privacy amendments, which are effective October 1st, 2025. They apply to controllers offering online services to known minors, 13 to 17. The takeaway is clear. The ability to process data anonymously is rapidly diminishing.
If I'm a compliance officer, just defining minor used to be a quick checklist item. Under 18, check. Now, based on this material, it looks like I need 3 separate flowcharts just for the age range above 13.
You do.
How did we get so fragmented? And why is the age range shifting so aggressively upward?
Well, we have to anchor ourselves with the one universal truth first. The minimum age for parental consent, which is consistent with federal COPPA, is universally under 13 across all non-California state data privacy laws.
Okay, so that part is stable.
That part is immutable. But the moment a child hits their 13th birthday, the finish line, the age at which these special protections cease, is constantly shifting. It depends on the state and the regulatory goal of that specific law.
So different ages for different policy goals. That makes sense.
Right. The age fragmentation exists because state legislatures have different goals. Are they trying to regulate data sales? Are they trying to protect platform users from harm? Or are they trying to prevent social media addiction? Each goal gets a different age bracket.
Okay, so let's break down these 3 distinct protective tiers that exist above the COPPA baseline. The first one seems to be ages 13 to 15.
Right. The 13 through 15 bracket is the default historical next step after COPPA. This is the age range that's most commonly addressed by amendments to those general consumer privacy laws we talked about.
And the focus there is usually on what? Data sales?
Almost always.
Yeah.
The focus is on restricting the sale or sharing of data without explicit affirmative consent or, providing enhanced opt-out rights.
But why 15? It just feels like a kind of arbitrary cutoff for data privacy.
It's often chosen as a political compromise or as a regulatory sweet spot. It
Mhm.
reflects the earliest age where a teenager might have some real autonomy, but, still requires specific statutory protection.
And which states are using this 13 to 15 range?
States that use this include California under the CCPA, Minnesota, Montana for their main GCL provisions, New Hampshire, and Oregon. For a business covered by those volume thresholds, these are the teenagers they have to worry about specifically when implementing restrictions on data sale or targeted ads.
And we noted that compliance isn't static even here. I mean, Connecticut started with the 13 to 15 bracket in Phase 1 of their Data Privacy Act,
Right, but it only runs until July 1st, 2026, when it then transitions to the higher tier.
which means businesses have to invest in systems right now, knowing that the regulatory requirement is going to shift on them next year.
A moving target.
Okay, moving up one notch, we hit the mid-tier, ages 13 to 16. The cutoff shifts up 1 year, typically targeting younger high schoolers. Why is 16 a common cutoff, especially for platform regulation?
Well, 16 is often the age of assumed partial emancipation or specific legal rights, like driving or working legally, but it is still well before the age of majority.
I see.
So this bracket is highly relevant in the social media regulation space, where the goal is often preventing platform harm or requiring parental consent for someone to even create an account. States using 13 to 16 include Arkansas, where this group is specifically called teens, and New Jersey.
And that age, 16, is particularly visible in direct platform regulation laws.
Yeah.
I mean, Georgia and Louisiana, for example, both apply their social media and platform regulation laws to users under 16, requiring age verification and parental consent for that specific group.
That really confirms that for specific types of services, compliance obligations are triggered based on the platform's function, not just data volume or generalized consumer rights.
And then we get to the highest tier, which seems to be under 18. This feels like the future trend we absolutely have to pay the most attention to.
It is.
If the law defines minor as under 18, it means the entire teenage population up to the eve of their 18th birthday is protected. What policy goal is driving this push all the way to 18?
The push to 18 is driven less by data sales regulation and much more by concerns over platform design, addictive technology, and psychological harm. If the law is an age-appropriate design code, it views all teenagers as needing protection from manipulative design features, not just, restrictions on data sales.
And we're already seeing this embedded in the general consumer laws through specific amendments. Several states have extended their GCL amendments to cover this full teenage range of 13 to 17.
That's right. This includes Colorado, Delaware, the Maryland Online Data Privacy Act, MODPA, and those specialized children's privacy amendments in Montana. If you operate in those states, you are protecting a far wider user group than you were just 5 years ago.
But the purest expression of the under 18 focus is found in those dedicated AEDC and targeting focus laws.
Absolutely. The Maryland Age-Appropriate Design Code Act, New York's targeting law, Vermont, and Nebraska all designate the protected age as under 18. This is a massive shift in scope because it means services have to fundamentally change how they treat users who are, in other contexts, legally able to do things like sign contracts.
And the implementation here is extremely aggressive. I mean, Tennessee's Protecting Children from Social Media Act explicitly requires parental consent verification for social media users under 18.
And that law allows parents to actively monitor privacy settings and set time restrictions or schedule breaks. It specifically targets the full teenage spectrum, viewing a 17-year-old as requiring the same parental involvement as a 13-year-old when they're on social platforms.
And to really solidify this trend toward under 18, we have to look at these specialized App Store accountability laws.
These are critical. They're so important because they bypass the traditional revenue thresholds entirely, and they target the gatekeepers, the operating system providers, the App Store providers, and the developers who are reliant on those ecosystems.
So these laws are basically introducing age signaling requirements at the architectural level of the internet. They're forcing platforms to know the age of their users, or at least confirm they're not minors, before they can even distribute apps.
Exactly. And California's Digital Age Assurance Act, Louisiana's App Store Accountability Law, Texas, and Utah all set the protected age range for these laws at under 18. They're essentially mandating that the digital infrastructure itself must protect all teenagers.
And the clock is ticking on implementation. These aren't just proposed bills. These laws are rolling out soon.
very soon. Texas's law goes into effect in January 2026, Louisiana in July 2026, and California in January 2027. If you're a developer, this solidifies a clear and frankly expensive future trend. You must have compliance obligations covering the entire under-18 cohort in major U.S. states, regardless of your volume or revenue.
Okay, so we've established the age range as a complete maze. Step 2, determining if your company is actually covered, is even more granular. The specific applicability requirements, the quantitative thresholds, are so complex and so varied that they demand careful, ongoing tracking.
The problem for compliance officers isn't just checking if they hit a number. It's checking if they hit 4 or 5 different numbers in various combinations across multiple states.
And most of these laws offer a dual path, right? Either you're massive based on your volume, or you're maybe mid-sized, but you're disproportionately reliant on data sales for your revenue.
And you have to calculate both of those paths every single year.
The fact we've just listed, 5 different required revenue percentages, coupled with conflicting volume requirements, 100K, 35K, 25K, it just shows exactly why you need tracking tools. It's impossible to manage this manually.
It really is.
Which is why we need to pause and again thank our sponsor. The CISO Marketplace Ecosystem Micro Tool, www.childrenprivacylaws.com, is designed specifically to help organizations navigate this intricate ecosystem, ensuring you aren't just guessing at which threshold or which combination of thresholds applies to you.
It's an essential tool. So let's dive deeper into how these different thresholds really reflect the regulatory intent behind them. We can really categorize the quantitative approach into 2 tiers.
Yeah.
You've got the Big 5 approach, which uses that 100,000 consumer count as the high-volume trigger that's designed to regulate the nationwide giants. And then you have what I call the aggressive mid-market approach, which uses a lower consumer count, typically 25,000, combined with a monetization threshold.
So let's compare those monetization thresholds. New Jersey, Minnesota, and Oregon all used the 100,000 consumer threshold for their high bar.
Right.
But if they don't meet that, they have to check the lower bar, which is processing data for 25,000 consumers A&D, deriving a specific percentage of revenue from data sales.
And that revenue percentage variation, that's the key to understanding the state's political motive.
Yeah.
Minnesota, Oregon, New Hampshire, and Montana, they set that data sales revenue trigger at 25% or more of gross revenue.
So that captures a significant portion of firms that rely on data sales as, say, a secondary but still important revenue stream.
Exactly. But other states are more aggressive on the low end or the high end of that monetization scale. Delaware and Maryland's MODPA, they set the revenue trigger slightly lower, at 20% or more of gross revenue from data sales.
So if you are a niche data services firm making 20.1% of your revenue from data sales, you are covered there, even if you only process data for 10,000 consumers.
That's a relatively low hurdle designed for broad coverage. But conversely, you have Virginia, which sets that revenue reliance threshold much higher. Over 50% of gross revenue from data sales, coupled with processing 25,000 consumers.
And that's highly specific. By setting the bar at 50%, Virginia is signaling that its law is not intended to cover general retailers or companies where data sales are just a small part of the profit mix.
It's targeting those companies where data brokerage or third-party sharing is truly the primary business model. The regulatory philosophy is distinct in every single state.
Okay, so this is where the jigsaw puzzle turns into a real brain teaser. Most states require you to meet one of the 2 pathways, volume or revenue reliance.
It's an OR condition.
But some states require a business to meet multiple distinct thresholds at the same time. It's an A&D condition. These are the most stringent applicability tests.
They demand a confluence of scale and activity. California provides a good example of this, combining the quantitative with the qualitative through knowledge.
How does that work?
A business must first meet one of the primary general thresholds, that massive $26.625 million in revenue or 100,000 plus consumers. They must also have actual knowledge of collecting personal data from consumers under 16.
So you have to be a giant and specifically know you are dealing with teens to trigger the CCPA's enhanced minor protections.
Right. They only want to regulate the largest players who are deliberately or knowingly dealing with minors.
Then you have Nebraska. Their law enforces what we can only call the triple threat for coverage, making it exceptionally high and restrictive.
It is. A covered service in Nebraska must have annual gross revenue over $25 million, A&D processed data of 50,000 plus consumers, households, or devices. A&D derived at least 50% plus of its annual revenue from the sale or sharing of consumer data.
Wow. So you have to hit all three of those.
All three. The intention behind Nebraska's law is to strictly limit its reach. If you miss any one of those three criteria, you are not covered. This tells us Nebraska is trying to regulate only the most profitable, most pervasive, and most monetizing data companies.
It's a deliberate attempt at narrow applicability, which contrasts really sharply with the broader intent we see in a state like Maryland.
Right. And the Maryland Kids Code also demands multiple hurdles. You have to meet one of the high volume or revenue general thresholds, A&D. Your service must be reasonably likely to be accessed by children. It's a combination of scale and intent.
So a massive data firm might be covered by MODPA.
But if their service is exclusively B2B and clearly not directed at children, they might successfully argue they're not covered by the AADC.
Which brings us back to the power of that intent track, the end run around all those high quantitative thresholds.
This regulatory tool exists specifically to ensure that smaller, specialized companies targeting teens have to comply, regardless of whether their revenue would ever cover a massive national retailer.
This is such a crucial practical distinction for businesses operating, specialized apps or services that aren't part of the big five of data processors.
It is. Arkansas, Colorado, New York, and Vermont all have laws where the trigger is targeting or knowledge, not high revenue or volume.
So think about the different regulatory burdens. A small, specialized website that is primarily directed to minors in New York, which covers under 18, is covered from June 2025 onwards. Full stop.
Full stop. It's because of its intent. Their budget for compliance is determined entirely by their target audience.
Conversely, a massive national retailer might accidentally process data from a small number of teens, but if they don't meet that 100K consumer threshold or the revenue percentage in certain states, they might not be covered by the general consumer law.
Intent truly matters now, and it forces age assurance and design changes on smaller entities that those volume-based laws would completely miss.
The rules we've discussed, the age ranges, the thresholds, the intent requirements, they're complex enough. But the landscape is anything but static.
It's moving at warp speed.
It really is. And that's primarily due to specific legislative efforts targeting social media and, maybe more importantly, the massive legal turbulence surrounding these new laws. Most of them are being challenged on constitutional grounds.
The shift toward direct social media and platform regulation really is the next frontier. These laws are often separate acts that introduce specific rules about account creation, monitoring, direct messaging for minors.
And they are overwhelmingly targeting the under 18 age range.
Overwhelmingly. Because the regulatory focus is on safety and platform harm, not just data handling.
So let's contrast a couple of key state approaches. Florida has taken one of the most drastic and high-friction approaches with its Online Protections for Minors Act.
One of the most aggressive, for sure. It prohibits social media accounts for children under 14 entirely. It requires age verification just to ensure that demographic cannot sign up.
And then it requires parental consent for 14 and 15-year-olds. So this is a total ban for young children, which fundamentally alters the service's accessibility.
Florida's approach forces a hard line. If you're under 14, you cannot access these platforms. Tennessee's approach, with their Protecting Children from Social Media Act, is different.
How?
It focuses on parental empowerment for the full under 18 group. It requires parental consent verification, and then it allows parents to actively monitor privacy settings, set time restrictions, or schedule breaks.
So it shifts compliance from passive restrictions on data use to active requirements for platform functionality and parental control tools.
That's a huge operational difference. Florida mandates exclusion and deletion. Tennessee mandates enablement and monitoring.
And we also see highly specific functional mandates, like in Louisiana's Secure Online Child Interaction and Age Limitation Act, which applies to users under 16.
Right. In addition to requiring age verification and parental consent, it uniquely bans direct messaging between minors under 16 and any unknown adults.
That is a functional design requirement aimed directly at safety and preventing online solicitation. It just shows how states are now delving into platform functionality far beyond what traditional privacy laws ever contemplated.
And moving beyond just social media, a related regulatory track focuses on age verification to restrict access to content that's deemed harmful to minors.
Right. This usually means requiring some form of digital ID before you can access certain sites. Our sources indicate there are currently 19 states with age verification requirements for harmful content.
With more pending, Ohio and Arizona are effective later in 2025.
And these laws represent a direct conflict between the state's interest in protecting children and the fundamental right to anonymous speech under the First Amendment.
They absolutely do. They require users to verify that they are adults before accessing specific types of content, which inherently involves some form of data collection or identification. This creates a significant chilling effect on anonymous browsing, even for adults.
And this is not just academic. The legal future of these laws is imminent. I mean, the most significant development is the pending Supreme Court activity regarding the defense of Texas HB 1181.
That case was argued before the Supreme Court on January 15th, 2025. It directly examines whether these age verification requirements infringe on the First Amendment rights of users and content providers.
So what's the central constitutional question there?
It's whether requiring age verification is the least restrictive means to achieve the goal of protecting minors. Challengers argue that these laws force adults to surrender their privacy by giving up their ID to a third party just to access a website, which unduly burdens their right to access lawful content anonymously.
And the states argue it's a necessary step.
A necessary step to shield minors from constitutionally unprotected material. The decision that's pending from the Supreme Court will determine the future viability of every single state-level harmful content law currently enacted or proposed.
Which brings us to the most volatile aspect of this entire landscape: enforcement. We have mapped out dozens of complex, highly restrictive laws, yet many of the strictest ones are currently non-enforceable due to litigation.
It's a bizarre compliance paradox.
It is. For companies, you must spend millions preparing for a law that might never actually take effect, or one that might be entirely rewritten by the courts.
This constant litigation is the natural outcome of aggressive state action, combined with these fundamental constitutional concerns. I mean, let's just list the major blocked or challenged laws to show how pervasive this turbulence is.
Go ahead.
The California Age-Appropriate Design Code Act, the AADC, the flagship design code, is currently stayed or enjoined. That effectively halts its implementation indefinitely pending the outcome of the lawsuit.
And the Maryland Kids Code, which we highlighted earlier for its stringent dual trigger requirements.
It's being actively challenged by NetChoice. That filing was made back in February 2025. Legal challenges are being mounted immediately upon passage, often arguing the laws violate the Commerce Clause by regulating activity outside state borders, or that they violate the First Amendment by chilling protected speech.
And the courts have been pretty blunt in their critiques of this state regulatory overreach.
Very blunt. States that have tried to enforce strict social media restrictions have faced major setbacks. Florida, Georgia, and Utah laws have all been challenged, and their enforcement has been blocked by litigation.
And there was that one really forceful legal opinion.
Oh, from Ohio. When the Ohio Parental Notification by Social Media Operators Act was blocked by a federal court, the judge called it breathtakingly blunt and constitutionally infirm. This legal resistance is not scattered. It's a systemic pattern that ensures regulatory fragmentation will continue, regardless of what the state legislatures pass.
So given all this state-level chaos and the judicial setbacks, does the federal government step in? I mean, we still have a backlog of pending federal legislation that could theoretically change everything overnight.
You mean COPI 2.0, KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act, COSMEMA?
Oh, Stop the Scroll Act?
There are so many.
There are. And federal action would certainly reduce the compliance friction.
Yeah.
But until that unified approach arrives, compliance obligations are still dictated by the FTC's regulatory updates.
And importantly, the FTC amended the existing COPIP rule in April 2025, and compliance is mandatory by April 22, 2026. These updates are concrete and require businesses to implement mandatory written information security programs and written data retention policies. That's a practical, non-negotiable requirement organizations have to meet, regardless of the state-level constitutional battles.
And finally, we're seeing new regulatory focus points emerge that signal a massive philosophical shift beyond just data collection and into user experience psychology.
You're talking about California's AB 56.
Exactly. Effective January 2027, it requires periodic warnings to users 17 and under about mental health harms.
And that shift to regulating for mental health harm as seen in AB 56 is perhaps the most existential threat to platform design we've seen yet. It moves regulation far beyond the technicalities of data leakage and privacy breaches and into the realm of user experience psychology.
So it requires platforms to actively assess and warn users about the potential addictive or harmful psychological effects of their own product?
It's no longer just about privacy. It's about safety, design, and psychological impact. And that trend is likely to continue nationwide.
So we've mapped the state-level children's privacy landscape today, and it is truly a tangled web. We've moved from the simple baseline of under 13 parental consent to a complex matrix of age ranges 15, 16, 17, and that growing cohort of under 18.
And these obligations are triggered by a dizzying array of metrics: annual revenue, total data volume, data sales percentage, and those crucial subjective factors of intent or knowledge of minors' use.
The main lesson for any organization operating online is this. National compliance now requires a jurisdiction-by-jurisdiction approach, running multiple applicability tests against highly fragmented age requirements.
Absolutely. And the fragmented nature of these laws means a business might easily escape the general law threshold in one state, but be instantly covered by that state's children's amendments if they know a 17-year-old is using their service.
Which forces expensive design changes and age assurance mechanisms.
And this complexity is only increasing as more states introduce these specific AADC bills.
We hope this deep dive clarified not just what the rules are, but why they are so granular and conflicting. Tracking these details is crucial for operational security and legal compliance.
It really is.
And thank you again to our sponsor, www.childrenprivacylaws.com, for supporting this discussion and providing a resource that's built specifically to navigate this incredibly challenging ecosystem.
And here is a final provocative thought for you to chew on. Considering the sheer number of state laws currently blocked or challenged in court on constitutional grounds, we really have to ask, are we destined for a world where only the Supreme Court or Congress can truly define online privacy for minors and restore some order?
Or will this chaotic patchwork, with half the laws blocked by injunctions, remain the unstable status quo for years to come?
Something to think about.
That's something to think about as you navigate the age maze. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Until then.